Captain Kim Dae-ho walked slowly through the metal corridors of his ship. The new Seoul was the first ship that Earth had ever built for meeting aliens in deep space. It had taken 3 years to build and 6 months to reach this place. The ship was not the biggest or the fastest, but it was strong and it carried the hopes of all humanity. Kim stopped at a window and looked out at the space station. They were going to meet the Valdori here. The Valdori were the oldest race in the galaxy. They had been flying between stars for over 50,000 years when humans were still living in caves and hunting with spears. The Valdori already ruled half the galaxy. The space station was huge. It looked like a giant wheel spinning slowly in the darkness. Kim could see ships from many different worlds docked at the station. Some ships were long and thin like needles. Others were round like balls. A few ships were so strange that Kim could not even guess what they were supposed to look like. Kim turned away from the window and walked to the bridge. His crew was waiting for him. Lieutenant Lee Sungmin was checking the communication systems. Commander Park Sora was reading reports from the other ships at the station. Everyone looked nervous and excited at the same time. This was the biggest moment in human history. Humans had only learned that aliens existed 5 years ago. A Valdori probe had found Earth and sent a message. The message was simple: welcome to the galaxy, young ones. We would like to meet you. For 5 years Earth had prepared for this moment. They had built the new Seoul and trained a crew. They had chosen their best diplomats and their smartest scientists. They had practiced what to say and how to act. Everything had to be perfect. Ambassador Park Ji-woo entered the bridge. She was wearing her best formal clothes and carrying a briefcase full of gifts from Earth. The gifts included art, music, books, and samples of food from every country. Kim thought the aliens might find them interesting. Are you ready? Captain Park asked. Kim nodded, but inside he felt worried. The Valdori were so old and so powerful. What if humans said something wrong? What if the Valdori decided that humans were not worth talking to? What if this meeting was the end of human contact with the galaxy instead of the beginning? The communication system beeped. Lieutenant Lee looked up from his controls. Captain, the Valdori are ready to meet us. They are waiting in conference room 7. Took a deep breath. This is it. People, remember what we practiced. Be polite, be respectful, and do not make any sudden movements. We do not know how the Valdori will react to things. The walk to conference room 7 felt like the longest walk of Kim's life. The corridors of the space station were filled with aliens Kim had never seen before. Some had fur, some had scales, some looked almost human but with different colored skin. A few aliens stopped and stared at the humans, but most just ignored them. Conference room 7 was enormous. The ceiling was so high that Kim could barely see it. The walls were made of some kind of metal that changed colors like oil on water. The air smelled strange. Not bad, but definitely not like Earth air. Valdori were waiting in the room. Kim had seen pictures of Valdori before, but seeing them in person was different. They were tall, much taller than humans. Their skin was silver and seemed to glow with its own light. Each Valdori had 4 arms and their hands had 6 fingers. The most important Valdori was sitting at the head of a long table. The Valdori stood up when the humans entered. They moved with grace and dignity that made Kim feel clumsy. His name was impossible for humans to say, so they had agreed to call him Speaker 1. The other 2 Valdori were called Speaker 2 and Speaker 3. Speaker 1 raised all 4 of his arms in what Kim hoped was a greeting. Welcome, humans of Earth. We have traveled far to meet you. We are honored to be the first to welcome your species to the galactic community. Kim bowed the way they had practiced. Thank you, Speaker 1. We are honored to meet you. The people of Earth are excited to learn about the galaxy and to make friends with other worlds. For the next 3 hours they talked about many things. The Valdori told them about trade routes between different worlds. They explained how different species work together. They talked about sharing technology and knowledge. The Valdori seemed genuinely interested in human culture and asked many questions about Earth. Kim began to relax. The meeting was going well. The Valdori were polite and seemed to like humans. They even laughed at some of Ambassador Park's jokes, which was a good sign. Kim started to think that maybe this would be the beginning of a great friendship between Earth and the galaxy. Then Kim made the offer that changed everything. We would be honored to welcome you to Earth, Speaker 1. Our planet has many beautiful places to visit. We have great cities with amazing architecture. We have museums full of art and history. We have music and food that we think you would enjoy. And of course, we would give you our finest hospitality. The room became silent so suddenly that Kim could hear his own heartbeat. Speaker 1 had been reaching for a glass of water, but his hand stopped in the air. All 4 of his arms began to shake. The silver glow of his skin faded until he looked almost white. The other 2 Valdori stood up so fast that their chairs fell over backwards. They moved away from the table and closer to the door. Speaker 2 said something in the Valdori language that sounded like a warning. Speaker 3 was making a noise that might have been fear. Speaker 1 stood up. His full height was impressive and scary at the same time. His forearms were still shaking and his voice cracked when he spoke. Never, we will never set foot on that cursed world. This meeting is over. The 3 Valdori rushed toward the door. Speaker 1 stopped for a moment and looked back at the humans. Do not follow us. Do not contact us again. Stay away from our worlds. His voice was filled with something that Kim had never expected to hear from the galaxy's most powerful race. Fear. The door closed behind the Valdori with a loud clang. Kim and his team sat in the empty conference room staring at each other. Nobody moved for a long time. Finally, Ambassador Park spoke in a whisper. "What just happened?" Kim shook his head. Slowly, "I have no idea, but we are going to find out." Lieutenant Lee was the first to recover. He started gathering up the papers and gifts that were scattered on the table. "Should we try to contact them again?" "No," Kim said. "Not yet. Something is very wrong. Here the Valdori were afraid when I mentioned Earth, but afraid of what we need to learn more before we try to talk to them again." Commander Park looked around the empty room. "Captain, what could possibly make the oldest race in the galaxy afraid of Earth? What could humans have done? We have only been in space for a few hundred years. They have been out here for 50,000 years." Kim stood up and walked to the window that looked out into space. The stars looked the same as they always had, but everything felt different now. The universe was full of mysteries, and it seemed that Earth was one of them. "I do not know what happened," Kim said, "but I am going to find out. Even if it takes the rest of my life, I am going to learn why the Valdori are afraid of our world." The crew of the New Soul spent the rest of the day trying to understand what had gone wrong. Kim sent messages to the Valdori ship but got no response. He tried to contact other alien ships at the station, but most of them refused to talk. Some aliens who had been friendly before now avoided the humans completely. That night, Kim could not sleep. He kept thinking about the fear in speaker one's voice and the way the other Valdori had run from the room. What secret was the galaxy keeping from humanity? What had happened on Earth that made the most powerful race in the galaxy swear never to return? Kim looked out at the stars and made a promise to himself he would find the answers no matter how long it took. The people of Earth deserved to know their own history, and Kim was going to make sure they learned the truth. Lieutenant Lee Sungmin had always been good at listening to conversations that were not meant for his ears. It was a skill that had helped him many times during his years in the Earth military. Now on this alien space station, he was using the skill to try to solve the mystery of why the Valdori had run away from them. While Captain Kim and Ambassador Park held formal meetings with other alien diplomats, Lee spent his time in the lower levels of the station. These levels were darker and noisier than the upper diplomatic areas. Down here, alien traders, smugglers, and information brokers gathered to do business that was not always legal. The lower levels had many bars and taverns. Each one was designed for different types of alien life forms. Some had thick atmosphere for species that breathed heavy gases. Others had low gravity for creatures that came from small worlds. Lee had to be careful because some of these places could kill a human just by walking inside. Lee found a bar called the Void's End that seemed safe for humans. The air was breathable and the gravity was normal. The bartender was a short alien with purple skin and 3 eyes. He served drinks in containers that changed shape depending on who was holding them. Lee ordered something that looked like water but tasted like fruit. He sat in a corner and listened to the conversations around him. Most of the talk was about trade routes and cargo prices, but every now and then he heard whispers about the humans and their meeting with the Valdori. After 2 hours of listening, Lee heard something interesting. A small furry alien with 3 eyes was talking to a group of traders. The alien was called Pip, and he belonged to a species called the Cathari. Lee had read about the Cathari in the briefing files. They were known for collecting information and selling it to anyone who would pay. Pip was telling the other traders about rare metals from the Outer Rim worlds. Lee waited until the other traders left, then he moved to Pip's table. He bought Pip several drinks and they talked about harmless things for a while. Lee learned that Pip had been trading information for over 30 years and had visited hundreds of worlds. Finally, Lee decided to take a chance. He leaned closer to Pip and spoke quietly. "I need to ask you about something that happened today. My people had a meeting with the Valdori and something went wrong." Pip's 3 eyes blinked one after another, which Lee thought might mean he was thinking hard. "Your people do not know, do they?" Pip asked. "What happened on your world long ago?" Lee felt his heart beat faster. "What are you talking about? What happened on Earth?" Pip looked around the bar nervously, then moved his chair closer to Lee. "The Valdor have records that go back to the beginning of their civilization. They know things about every world in the galaxy. But Earth scares them." "Why would Earth scare the most powerful race in the galaxy?" Lee asked. "Because they have been there before," Pip whispered. Long ago, when your species was still young, something happened there that made them swear never to return. They call Earth the world of the unbroken in their old language." Lee felt cold despite the warm air in the bar. "Unbroken, what does that mean?" But Pip was already standing up and backing away from the table. "I have said too much. The Valdori have ears everywhere. If they knew I told you this." He looked around the bar with all 3 eyes wide with fear. "I must go," Lee called out, but Pip was already running toward the exit. He disappeared into the crowd of aliens before Lee could follow him. Lee spent the rest of the night moving from bar to bar trying to find other aliens who would talk to him about Earth. He met traders who had visited hundreds of worlds. He talked to smugglers who claimed they were not afraid of anything. He even found a few information brokers who sold secrets for a living. But every time Lee mentioned Earth, the aliens would stop talking. Some would make excuses and leave. Others would suddenly remember important business elsewhere. A few aliens even looked scared when he said the name of his home world. One alien trader told Lee that there were stories about Earth, but he would not say what the stories were about. Another alien said that the Valdori had forbidden anyone from talking about what happened on the human world long ago. A third alien warned Lee that asking too many questions about Earth could get him in trouble with the Valdor. Lee realized that whatever had happened between the Valdor and Earth was not just a secret, it was a secret that the entire galaxy knew about except humans themselves. The thought made him angry. How could the whole galaxy know something about Earth that Earth did not know about itself? When Lee returned to the nuke sol early in the morning, he found Captain Kim waiting for him in the communications room. Kim looked tired and frustrated. The captain had spent the night trying to contact the Valdori, but they had ignored every message. Captain, I learned something important, Lee said. He told Kim about his conversations with Pip and the other aliens. He explained about the name World of the Unbroken and how every alien seemed to know a secret about Earth. Kim listened carefully to everything Lee said. When Lee finished talking, Kim was quiet for a long time. Finally he spoke. We need to know more about this. Lee, contact Dr. Yang Haijin on Earth. Tell her we need her to look for any evidence of alien contact in our ancient history. Lee nodded, but he felt worried about what they might find. Captain, what if we do not like what we learn? What if there is a good reason why the Valdori do not want to come to Earth? Kim looked out the window at the space station where hundreds of alien ships were docked. We have a right to know our own history, Lee. Whatever happened on Earth in the past, our people deserve to know the truth. Lee sent the message to Dr. Yang on Earth using the quantum communication system. It would take several hours for the message to reach Earth and several more hours for a reply. Lee hoped that Dr. Yang would be able to find some answers in the ancient records and archaeological sites. While they waited for Dr. Yang's reply, Kim and Lee continued trying to learn more about the mystery. Some of the alien diplomats at the station were willing to talk to them, but none would discuss Earth directly. They spoke in hints and suggestions. That made the mystery even deeper. One alien diplomat told Kim that humans were lucky to have developed space travel on their own. Most species had help from older races, but humans had figured everything out by themselves. Another diplomat mentioned that human determination was famous throughout the galaxy, but would not explain why. The most interesting conversation came from an alien scientist who studied the history of galactic civilizations. She told Kim that there were very few species in the galaxy that the Valdori truly feared. Most races that had opposed the Valdori in the past had been conquered or destroyed, but there were a few species that the Valdori had simply avoided. When Kim asked which species these were, the scientists it became uncomfortable. She said that most of these species were extinct now, but there were rumors that one species still existed somewhere in the galaxy, a species that had never been conquered by anyone. Kim felt a chill when he heard this. Could she be talking about humans? Could Earth be the home of a species that had somehow stood up to the Valdori 50,000 years ago? More Kim and Lee learned, the more questions they had. Why did the Valdori call Earth the world of the unbroken? What had happened during their ancient visit to Earth? Why were they so afraid to return? As the day went on, Kim realized that finding the answers to these questions might be the most important thing humans had ever done. The truth about Earth's past could change everything humans thought they knew about themselves and their place in the galaxy. Kim made a decision. He would not give up until he learned the truth about Earth and the Valdor. Even if it took months or years, he would find out why the galaxy's oldest race refused to set foot on his home world. The people of Earth deserved to know their own story, no matter how strange or frightening it might be. Dr. Yang Haijin had been studying ancient human history for 20 years, but she had never looked for signs of aliens visiting Earth. When Captain Kim's message reached her, she felt excited and scared at the same time. If aliens had come to Earth thousands of years ago, it would change everything humans thought they knew about their past. Dr. Yang worked at Seoul National University in the Department of Ancient History. She was famous for finding connections between different ancient cultures around the world. Now she had to search for something much more unusual, evidence that aliens had visited Earth long before humans developed space travel. Dr. Yang called together the best team she could find. Professor Choi Minho was an expert in ancient languages and could read texts that were thousands of years old. Dr. Park Hyun-woo knew more about cave paintings and ancient art than anyone else in Korea. Graduate student Kong So-young was young, but she had amazing skills at finding patterns that other people missed. The team started by looking at the strangest artifacts and art from ancient times. They searched through museum collections and archaeological sites looking for anything that seemed out of place or impossible for ancient humans to have made. The first breakthrough came from Professor Choi. He was studying cave paintings in the mountains of Korea when he noticed something that made him call Dr. Yang immediately. Yang, you need to see this. These paintings are unlike anything I have ever seen before. Dr. Yang drove to the cave site in the mountains. The cave was deep and dark, and the paintings were on the walls far from the entrance. Professor Choi led her to a section of the cave where the paintings were Paintings showed tall figures with forearms facing groups of human warriors. The style was completely different from other ancient Korean art. The colors were made from pigments that did not exist naturally in Korea. The four-armed figures wore clothes and carried weapons that looked too advanced for ancient times. But what made Dr. Yang most excited was what the paintings showed next. In the final scenes, the four-armed beings were not fighting anymore. Instead, they seemed to be running away. The humans in the paintings were not shown as winners in battle, but as something that made the aliens afraid. This is incredible, Dr. Yang said as she took pictures of every painting, but we need more evidence. One cave is not enough over the next 2 weeks, Dr. Yang and her team found similar paintings all over the world. Cave paintings in France showed the same four-armed beings. Rock art in Australia depicted identical scenes. Carvings in ancient temples in South America told the same story. Every location showed the same pattern: four-armed aliens arriving on Earth, conflict between the aliens and early humans. The aliens eventually retreating, not because they lost, but because they were afraid of something about humans. The most important discovery came from Kang Soyoung, the graduate student. She had been studying ancient texts in a monastery in Tibet when she found a scroll that had been hidden for centuries. The monks told her the scroll was very old and written in a language that few people could read. Kong brought the scroll back to Seoul and Professor Choi worked for days to translate it. The writing was in an ancient dialect that was thousands of years old. But when Professor Choi finally decoded it, the story it told was amazing. Long ago, beings from the stars came to Earth. The scroll said they were old and powerful masters of fire and metal. They had conquered many worlds and made slaves of countless species. They came to Earth expecting to do the same to humans. Scroll described how the star beings had weapons that could destroy mountains and ships that could cross the empty space between worlds. They demanded that humans bow down and serve them as other species had done on other worlds, but humans were different. The scroll continued: when the star beings tried to make humans into slaves, humans fought back. When their cities were destroyed, humans built new ones. When their leaders were killed, new leaders took their place. The scroll told of a war that lasted for many years. The star beings had better weapons and could fly through the sky. But humans had something the aliens had never seen before. Humans would not give up no matter how badly they were beaten. Humans kept fighting no matter how hopeless things seemed. Humans found new ways to resist. Yang felt her hands shake as she read the most important part of the scroll. The star beings had conquered 1,000 worlds in 50,000 years. They had never met a species that would not eventually surrender, but humans were unbreakable. The scroll described the final battle where a group of human prisoners somehow managed to steal and destroy one of the alien ships. It should have been impossible for humans to understand alien technology, but they found a way. The loss of their ship terrified the star beings more than any defeat in battle. In the end, the star beings left Earth not because they were beaten, but because they were afraid. The scroll explained they had never encountered a species that simply refused to be broken. They called humans the unbroken ones and swore never to return to the world where such beings lived. Yang immediately sent her findings to Captain Kim on the space station. The message included pictures of all the cave paintings, translations of the ancient texts, and her team's analysis of what had happened. When Captain Kim received Dr. Yang's report, he felt a mixture of pride and understanding. Everything was starting to make sense. The Valdori had not lost a war on Earth. They had left because they could not understand a species that would not surrender. But Kim knew he needed to hear the truth directly from the Valdori themselves. He needed to know exactly what had happened 50,000 years ago and why the galaxy kept it secret from humans. Kim made a decision that shocked his entire crew. He sent a message directly to the Valdori homeworld demanding to speak with their highest leaders. He knew it was dangerous and could end all hope of friendship between humans and the Valdori, but he had to know the truth. The response came 3 days later. The Valdori High Council would meet with Kim, but only if he came alone to their sacred world of Valdris Prime. It was clearly a test or a trap, but Kim did not hesitate. Kim took a small shuttle and left the new soul behind. His crew wanted to come with him, but Kim refused. This was something he had to do alone. The journey to Valdris Prime took 2 days, and Kim spent the time thinking about what he would say to the galaxy's oldest reservoir. Dresd Prime was the most beautiful world Kim had ever seen. Cities made of crystal floated in the sky, connected by bridges of light. The ground was covered with gardens that seemed to glow with their own inner fire. Kim could see why the Valdori considered this world sacred. Kim was met by Valdori guards who escorted him to the High Council chamber. The chamber was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to reach toward the stars. 7 ancient Valdori sat in chairs made of some kind of glowing stone. The High Counselor was older than the other Valdori. His silver skin was marked with patterns that showed his incredible age. His name was Eldest Keth, and when he spoke, his voice sounded like distant thunder. "You wish to know why we will not return to your world, young human?" Eldest Keth asked. "Yes," Kim said simply. "My people deserve to know their own history." Eldest Keth was quiet for a long time, then he spoke words that would change everything. "Very well. We will tell you the truth, though it brings us no honor." Captain Kim sat in the great council chamber of Valdris Prime, waiting to hear the truth that had been hidden from humanity for 50,000 years. The 7 members of the Valdor High Council sat before him, their ancient faces showing emotions that Kim could not read. Eldest Keth, the leader of the council, began to speak in a voice that carried the weight of countless years. "We will tell you the story of your people and ours, young human, but know that it is not a tale of glory for the Valdori. Ago, when your species was young, we were already masters of the galaxy," Eldest Keth said. "We had built great cities on 100 worlds. We had ships that could cross the dark between stars and days. We had weapons that could crack planets and technology that seemed like magic. The Valdori had become the first spacefaring race in the galaxy, and they had used their advantage to build an empire. But their empire was different from what humans might expect. They did not conquer worlds through violence. Instead, they conquered through fear and power. When We arrived at a new world, Eldest Keth explained. We would demonstrate our abilities. We would show the native species our great ships, our powerful weapons, our advanced technology. Most species would look at what we could do and decide that resistance was pointless. This was how the Valdori had built their empire for 50,000 years. They had traveled from world to world. Most species would see the Valdori power and choose to surrender without fighting. They would become part of the Valdori Empire, serving the ancient race in exchange for protection and technology. Earth was supposed to be like all the others, Eldest Keth continued. We arrived at your world with our great ships. We expected your ancestors to be amazed by our power. We showed them our weapons, demonstrated our technology, demanded their submission. But something unexpected happened. The humans did not surrender. Instead, they picked up rocks and sticks and tried to fight. Ships that could fly through space, they threw spears at beings who could destroy their cities with a thought. They refused to bow down even when it seemed hopeless. The Valdor had never encountered anything like this. Every other species in the galaxy had eventually seen reason and accepted Valdori rule, but humans were different. When their cities were destroyed, they built new ones. When their weapons were taken away, they made new weapons with their bare hands. We spent 100 of your years trying to break your species, Eldest Keth said, and Kim could hear something like admiration in his voice. We could have destroyed your entire world with our weapons, but that was not our way. We preferred to rule rather than eliminate, but your people simply would not be ruled. Kim leaned forward in his chair. What happened? What made you finally level this? Keth was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with an emotion that Kim realized was fear. It was the prisoners. He said, a group of human prisoners led by a warrior whose name is lost to time. The story that followed amazed Kim. The Valdori had captured a group of human fighters and brought them aboard one of their great ships. The ship was enormous, larger than any human city and filled with technology that humans could not possibly understand, but the human prisoners had done something that should have been impossible. They had somehow learned to use Valdori technology. They had taken control of parts of the ship and used the Valdori weapons against their captors. Most incredibly, they had managed to destroy the entire ship, taking their own lives in the process. That was when we realized the truth about your species, Eldest Keth said. Your people possessed something we had never encountered in 50,000 years of conquest, an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The Valdori had always succeeded because other species would eventually give up when the cost of fighting became too high, but humans, it seemed to have no limit to what they would sacrifice for freedom. Even when facing impossible odds, they would find new ways to resist. We called you the Unbroken Ones, Eldest Keth explained, because no matter what we did to your people, they would not break. We realized that we had only two choices. We could destroy your entire world and eliminate your species completely, or we could leave and never return. Kim felt his heart racing. Why did you choose to leave? Because eliminating your species would have changed us, Eldest Keth said. We had never destroyed an entire world before. We were conquerors, not exterminators. But more than that, we were afraid of what your example might do to our empire. The Valdori realized that if other species learned about humanity, they might start to wonder if they too could resist Valdori rule. The example of humans refusing to surrender could inspire rebellions across the galaxy. So we made a choice that we have regretted for 50,000 years. Eldest Keth continued, we left your world and swore never to return. We told ourselves it was wisdom to avoid a species that could not be controlled, but in truth we were afraid. Kim sat back in his chair, trying to process everything he had heard. So you have spent 50,000 years avoiding Earth because you were afraid of what humans represent. Not just afraid, Eldest Keth said, terrified. Your species proved that our entire philosophy was wrong. We had built our empire on the belief that every species would eventually submit to superior power, but humans showed that some spirits cannot be changed. Other Valdori council members had remained silent during Eldest Keth's story, but now one of them spoke. Your species has haunted our dreams for 50 millennia. We have watched from afar as you developed space travel, as you built your own ships, as you maintained that unbreakable spirit that once terrified us. Kim looked around the council chamber at the 7 ancient beings who had ruled the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed, and now he asked, what happens now? That is what we must decide. Eldest Keth replied, your people have grown strong in our absence. You have reached the stars on your own. You have built ships that rival our early vessels. You have maintained that spirit that made us flee your world. Kim stood up from his chair. We are not the same species that fought you with primitive weapons. We have learned wisdom along with strength. We are not looking to conquer anyone. We just want to take our place among the galactic community as equals. Perhaps, Eldest Keth said after a long pause, it is time for the Valdori to learn from the Unbroken Ones instead of fearing them. The words hung in the air like a promise. Kim realized that this moment could change the history of both species. The galaxy's oldest race was finally ready to face the species they had feared for 50,000 years. Over the next several days, Kim and the Valdori High Council worked out the details of a new relationship between their peoples. It would not be easy. There were 50,000 years of fear and misunderstanding to overcome, but both sides were ready to try. The agreement they reached was historic. The Valdori would share their ancient knowledge and technology with humanity. Humans would share something even more valuable, proof that any challenge could be overcome with enough determination and refusal to give up. When the negotiations were Finished, Kim prepared to return to his ship and his crew. He had learned the truth about humanity's place in the galaxy, and it was more amazing than he had ever imagined. As he walked toward his shuttle, eldest Keth called out to him, "Captain Kim." Turned around. Yes, the ancient Valdor leader looked at him with something that might have been respect. "In 50,000 years we have never met another species like yours. Perhaps it is time we learned what it means to be unbreakable." Captain Kim flew his small shuttle away from Valdris Prime with his mind full of the incredible story he had just heard. The truth about humanity's ancient encounter with the Valdori was more amazing than anything he could have imagined. His people were not just another species in the galaxy, they were the unbroken ones, the species that had made the galaxy's most powerful race free. The journey back to the diplomatic station took 2 days, and Kim spent the time thinking about what this meant. For humanity, the Valdori had left Earth 50,000 years ago because humans had proven that some spirits could not be conquered. Now humanity had returned to space on their own, and the galaxy would never be the same. When Kim arrived at the station, he found that word of his meeting with the Valdori High Council had already spread. Ambassador Park Ji-woo and Lieutenant Lee Seung-min were waiting for him at the docking bay along with the rest of his crew. Everyone wanted to know what that had happened on Valdris Prime. Kim gathered his crew in the conference room and told them everything: the ancient war between humans and Valdor, the prisoners who had somehow destroyed a Valdor ship, the decision to call humans the Unbroken Ones and flee from Earth, the 50,000 years of fear that had kept the Valdori away. Kim finished his story. The room was silent for a long time. Finally, Lieutenant Lee spoke. "So we are famous throughout the galaxy for being the species that would not give up." "That is exactly right," Kim said. "And now the Valdori want to return to Earth, not as conquerors but as partners. They want to learn from us instead of ruling over us." Ambassador Park looked amazed. "This changes everything, Kim. The Valdori are offering to share their technology and knowledge with us. They want to work together instead of staying apart." But the biggest surprise came when Kim and his crew left the conference room. The corridors of the station were filled with alien diplomats and traders, all waiting to meet with the humans. Word had spread throughout the galaxy that the Unbroken Ones had returned to space, and everyone wanted to be their friends instead of their enemies. Kim found himself shaking hands and tentacles and claws with representatives from dozens of different species. Aliens who had ignored humans before were now eager to talk about trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense. Pax, a tall blue alien with crystal spikes on his head, approached. "Kim, Captain Kim, my name is Ambassador Zethmar. I represent the Crystal Worlds Alliance. We have heard the story of your people, and we are impressed. We would like to discuss a partnership between our species." Kim shook the alien's hand carefully, avoiding the sharp crystal spikes. "We would be honored to talk with your people, Ambassador Zethmar." More aliens approached with similar offers. The feathered clans wanted to establish trade routes with Earth. The Silicon Collective was interested in sharing mining technology. A group of aquatic aliens called the Deep Current wanted to study human determination and apply it to their own challenges. Lieutenant Lee watched the crowd of aliens surrounding Kim and whispered to Ambassador Park, "This is incredible. Yesterday aliens were avoiding us. Today they all want to be our allies." Ambassador Park smiled as she watched Kim talking with a group of insectoid aliens. "It makes sense, Lee. Think about it from their perspective. For 50,000 years that Valdori have been the most powerful force in the galaxy. Now they discover that there is a species the Valdori actually fear. Every other race wants to be on our side." The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. Kim and his team found themselves at the center of a completely new kind of diplomacy. Instead of humans begging for acceptance into the galactic community, other species were competing for human friendship. The Valdori delegation arrived at the station 3 days later. Eldest Keth himself had come to personally oversee the historic agreement. His presence caused a sensation throughout the station. Everyone knew that the Valdori High Counselor had not left his home world in over 1,000 years. The signing ceremony was held in the station's largest conference room. Representatives from over 50 different species attended to witness the moment when the galaxy's oldest race would officially end their 50,000-year boycott of Earth. Eldest Keth stood at the podium, his forearms raised for attention. "For 50 millennia we have avoided the world called Earth and the species called human. We told ourselves it was wisdom, but in truth it was fear. Today we choose courage over fear and partnership over isolation." Kim stood up to reply on behalf of humanity. "I accept the friendship of the Valdori people. We look forward to learning from your ancient wisdom and sharing our own experiences with you. Earth welcomes the Valdori as honored guests and trusted allies." The crowd of alien diplomats erupted in cheers and various sounds of approval. The signing of the Earth-Valdori alliance marked the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. But the most important moment came after the ceremony, when Eldest Keth approached Kim privately. "Captain Kim, there is something I must tell you. The Valdori are not the only ones who know the story of the Unbroken Ones." Kim looked surprised. "What do you mean? There are other ancient races in the galaxy," Eldest Keth explained. "Beings who are almost as old as the Valdori. They too have heard the stories of your people. Some of them are curious about humanity, others are afraid, and a few are actively hostile to the idea of the Unbroken Ones returning to space." Kim felt a chill. "Are you saying humanity has enemies we do not know about?" "Hi. I'm saying that your return to the galaxy has consequences you have not yet considered." Eldest Keth said, but do not worry, the Valdori will stand with humanity against any threat. Your people proved long ago that they cannot be broken. We believe that together our species will be unstoppable. Over the following weeks, the diplomatic station became the center of a new kind of galactic politics, Earth. It was designated as a neutral meeting ground where all species could gather as equals. The Valdori, despite their ancient fear, began making plans to visit Earth for the first time in 50,000 years. Ambassador Park oversaw the creation of the Galactic Cooperation Council with Earth as its headquarters. Species that had been enemies for centuries agreed to work together, inspired by the human example of never giving up. Lieutenant Lee was put in charge of cultural exchange programs. Alien students would come to Earth to study human determination, while human students would travel to other worlds to learn about different ways of life. The transformation was remarkable. Within a month of the Earth-Valdori alliance being signed over, 100 different species had requested diplomatic relationships with humanity. Earth went from being unknown to being one of the most important worlds in the galaxy. Kim stood on the observation deck of the New Sol, watching as ships from dozens of worlds arrived at the station. He thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first disastrous meeting with the Valdori to this moment when humanity was becoming a leader in galactic affairs. Ambassador Park joined him at the observation deck. Captain, look at that. She pointed to a massive Valdori ship that was approaching the station. That is Eldest Keth's personal vessel. He is coming to Earth next week to see our world for himself. Kim smiled. The galaxy's oldest race is finally coming home to the world they once fled from. Not just coming home, Park said, but coming as friends and allies. Your ancestor who destroyed that Valdori ship 50,000 years ago could never have imagined that his actions would lead to this. Kim nodded as he watched more ships arrive at the station carrying diplomats and traders from across the galaxy. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was at the center of that change, all because humans had one quality that no other species possessed: the absolute refusal to give up. The unbroken ones had returned to space, and the galaxy would never be the same. Kim looked out at the stars, knowing that this was just the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and now humans would explore it not as conquerors but as the species that had taught the galaxy what it meant to never surrender. As more ships arrived at the station, Kim made a silent promise to the human warrior from 50,000 years ago whose name was lost to history. Thank you for showing the galaxy what humans are capable of. Your sacrifice made this moment possible. The stars seemed to shine brighter as Kim watched the greatest gathering of species in galactic history coming together in peace, all because one species had proven that some spirits could never be broken.